Many of you know who Dr. Bernard Lown is, but for those who don't, I think it's useful to point out a few things. He came from Lithuania as a young boy, grew up in Maine, and had a, I think, interesting career as a student and a medical student, and you'll have to go online to look at the video where he talks about how he got in trouble as a medical student for mixing up the white and the black blood transfusion bags at Johns Hopkins. He went on to train as an intern at Montefiore, and then was in pathology, of all things, at Yale, and then came to Boston and the Brigham. I'm not going to spend too much longer going through his career, but it would be an interesting exercise for someone to try to do a calculation of how many lives were touched by the delineation of the relationship of low potassium and digoxin and arrhythmias, the early mobilization of patients from myocardial infarction by getting into a chair. How's that for low technology? The defibrillator itself, and then more recently, his work on a more judicious use of technology in cardiology. But I think, for me, the singular pleasure of my returning back from training with him has been the opportunity to really, as a friend, talk at length and in detail about the great issues of the day, and this is a remarkable intelligence. He shaped me as a doctor and countless others, and in some way, shape, or form, I think touched millions of people with his activism, both social and medical. So I'm not going to say much more, but let's have Dr. Bernard Lown join us. I snuck in the introduction, so.
Vikas, Shannon, friends, family, colleagues, once again, good fortune and good genius enabled me to attend this assembly. We are here compelled by a dysfunctional healthcare system. Much of what I said at our last conference bears repetition. The problem then is how to repeat without being repetitious. At the same time, we need to explore new possibilities that have emerged since our last meeting 20 months ago. Such exploration is demanded by the unfolding health crisis. People, the historical agents of social transformation, are ready and eager for change. They wait for responsible leadership. I'm persuaded that effective leadership can come largely from the health profession. High on the agenda is to provide American people with wholesome health care. For an old codger who takes a dim view of what is transpiring in medicine, I remain an incorrigible optimist, convinced that change for the better, though not inevitable, is possible. the seemingly impossible may well be doable. Daily, the mass media report horror stories relating to our dysfunctional healthcare. People generally understand that medical care has become a huge industry, a hospital-centered sickness system driven largely by financial incentives. For many patients, the system has been life-saving and even miraculous. For millions of others, the results have been under-treatment, over-treatment, and mistreatment. The health system is broke. Government, big business, the media, and our profession relate the crisis largely to runaway costs. When I started medical practice in 1957, annual health spending was approximately $147 per person. Last year, it reached $8,953. During the same 55 years time span, viewed as part of the gross domestic product, health expenditures rose from 5 to 17%. This is substantially above the rate of inflation. In Massachusetts, where Obamacare prevails, healthcare costs are even higher. Yesterday's New York Times headlines that a single surgical stitch was billed around $500 in many hospitals. Such an impossible fiscal trajectory is unsustainable. I need some water. Water. Water, please, warm water. Inexorable cost escalation. Vikas, is this warm water?
This is room 10. This is room 10.
Oh, thank you, Vikas. Inexorable cost escalation is only one of the many afflictions of U.S. healthcare. These are numerous and bear repetition. I shall touch on some. The striking shift from primary to specialist care has exacted multiple adverse consequences, including an escalation of procedures, excessive and unnecessary prescribing, and an erotic infatuation with technology. These encourage both overtreatment and mistreatment. In my view, the lost art of listening and ignoring the patient as a human being is a quintessential failure of our healthcare. The current system of medical education and its Flexnerian focus on science leaches compassion and idealism from a majority of those entering medicine. Upon entering medical school, most first-year students are eager to do good for others. Once they reach the third year, largely based in hospitals burgeoning with sophisticated and costly technologies, career goals shift to doing well for themselves. No wonder a majority of matriculating young doctors concentrate on lucrative specialties. Far more deleterious to the health infrastructure is the minuscule funding devoted to preventive services. Health resources are largely allocated to chronic illness manifesting as acute disease. Resources for healthy lifestyles are underfunded, if funded at all. This is totally devoid of medical rationale and is economically perverse. The support for preventive medicine is largely voiced by public health professionals. Those vehemently arguing for reform or opposed to the escalation costs of healthcare are largely silent about the centrality of public health. An important question is why the American people have so long tolerated being short-shrifted in their health care. After emerging of the British National Health Service in 1948, all industrialized nations adopted some sort of single-payer arrangement. The fundamental principle is that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. This has gained popularity with the public and is supported by their health professions. A majority of industrialized democracies, including our next-door neighbor, Canada, have some form of single-payer system. Operating in Canada since 1984, the system is unique in administrative simplicity. I should have changed my voice. Unique in administrative simplicity. More than 85% of Canadians strongly support the medical care system. If we are to effect change, we must understand the state of mind of the public. Americans tolerate their health care for several reasons. Among these are the massive medicalization of thinking, a childish faith in the magic of technology, and a deeply ingrained sense of political futility, in no small measure due to the distrust of the ongoings in Washington. Vikas, in his opening remarks, quoted Robert Oppenheimer, and I quote, "Physicians have known," I'm sorry, I anticipate myself, "physicists have known sin. Indeed, we physicians have also indulged in sin." Among the leading perpetrators have been the American Medical Association. George, I'm not addressing you. You were an exemption to that. Back in the 1930s, the JAMA determined the drugs to be used by how much advertising pharmaceutical companies placed in the journal. The powerful leader of the AMA and editor of the JAMA, then Morris Fishbein, ruled the roost from 1924 to 1949. He campaigned against group practice as communistic and threatened expulsion from the profession, doctors attempting to organize groups, not organize unions, God forbid. The AMA maintained an unrelenting and widely circulated drumbeat of propaganda discrediting the British and Canadian healthcare services. For the next, I need water. Let me turn to Obamacare. Whatever the widely reported technical glitches in ACA implementation, it is likely that the hardware will be upgraded. Computer software will be configured. Web crashes during peak usage will be resolved. Healthcare Gov will ultimately accommodate the huge throngs wishing to sign up. Yet medical growth will progressively aggravate doctor shortages. Providers will be unwilling to take new patients because of inadequate investment. The Congressional Budget Office predicts that 9 million will gain coverage through Medicaid alone this year. All these didn't have to be. If one solves a problem improperly, one generates more problems than one bargained for. I digress to a personal note. An event that transpired more than 65 years ago. The only one here who remembers is my wife Louise there. At the time, I was in medical residency training. I was also active as the international vice president of AIMS. How many of you know AIMS? Oh my God. 2 people, 3 people. Bravo, bravo. A National Association of Interns and Medical Students. We were on the AMA blacklist because we supported medical school admission of women and Jews. We were designated as communists because we endorsed the Wagner-Murray-Dingle bill, which would have provided every American with universal health care. In the summer of 1947, anticipating British enactment of the National Health Service Act, I deemed it vital that AIMS members witness this milestone event. Iona, listen to what follows. Where is Iona? The great Iona. The idea was to hold a congress with British medical students in London, Oxford, and Birmingham. The AIMS leadership, running the organization on a shoestring, blessed this adventure. I faced several problems. Among these, recruiting an appropriate delegation, raising money, and keeping myself from being fired as a medical resident by a hospital administration. The enterprise could not have succeeded without my wife Louise. Though encumbered with an 8-month-old baby, she typed out 800 letters to AIMS members telling of this harebrained scheme of her husband. In a heroic, solitary deed, rather a remarkable deed was accomplished in the days before computers. We recruited 36 delegates from across the country. In July 1948, Iona, we sailed on her RMS Queen Elizabeth. The highlight was a meeting with Adoniram Bevan, the genius architect who brought the National Health Service into being in the UK. Bevan was the son of a Welsh coal miner, a lifelong champion of social justice, and an unflinching advocate for ordinary folks. He asked us, and I quote, don't trust my quote, it's from memory, "Is that terrible man Fishbein still alive? If he is, you will not have decent health care in your country this century." Blessed we are in a new century. as during the Nazi Blitz, the Brits, is that right? Does that cover Scotland, Ireland? Well, good. The Brits rapidly got their national act together and made the NHS a stunning success. The medical profession fought vehemently against enactment of the plan. But once it was the law of the land, doctors became the most fervent supporters. In the United States, conditions are quite different. Numerous polls show about 80% of people support some sort of single-payer system. This is true of 60% of our doctors. Many physicians, as well as the white public, are persuaded that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. We can, if we only will it. My personal view is that merely enacting such a national health plan, even if it were now possible, would not solve what ails American medicine. As Donald Berwick said, and I quote, "Nothing but systemic change will provide our people with the health care they deserve," end quote. We would still have to restore the patient's rightful place at the center of healing. We would still have to switch away from hospitals as the mainstay of sickness care. We would still have to incorporate into medical school curricula effective human communication and stress the role of psychosocial stress as a dominant, if not, in my mind, the dominant risk factor in all that ails humans. We would still have to invest heavily in preventive medicine and in palliative care. We would still have to quench the culture of overtreatment. Even if we did all of the above, we would continue to confront a large agenda of unaddressed issues. Including poverty and inequality as the leading causes of disease globally. Inequality is a fundamental issue of our time, including wealth inequality, racial inequality, economic inequality, and health inequality. This was discussed with deep conviction last week by Pope Francis in his 50,000-word apostolic exhortation. He denounced, and I quote, "the dictatorship of a global economic system and a free market that perpetuates inequality and divorce what is fragile, including human beings and the environment." Pope Francis added, quote, "Meanwhile, the excluded are waiting," end quote. We doctors are aware that the poor are the sickest. In 2012, 1 in 3 Americans were poor. 17 million of them were children. The World Health Organization has long emphasized that poverty is the leading cause of disease. Undertreatment is a dominant moral issue of our time. This receives little media coverage, rouses scant political interest, and is rarely discussed at our conferences. The disinherited of the earth, the sickest, the most disadvantaged remain largely excluded and have few advocates. There is one key issue unaddressed by us: I'm sure nearly everyone in this hall would agree that the unrushing climate crisis is a key health issue. Yesterday, Vikas, you quoted Albert Einstein, and I requote your quote. The splitting of the atom has changed everything except our way of thinking, and thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. Einstein was talking about the nuclear age. Having been involved in a lifetime of anti-nuclear struggle, I believe this statement is far more relevant to the climate transformation that is already upon us. Adverse health effects of climate change are now evident globally, especially affecting developing poor countries. The health cost will mount annually. The nearly unanimous opinion of climate scientists is that we have already passed a critical threshold beyond mitigation. Responsible citizenship, let alone our being health professionals, mandates climate in our agenda. According to an old French proverb, young people tell what they are doing, old people what they have done, and fools what they wish to do. Let me play the fool for a moment and tell you what I think needs to be done. Excuse me. We need to emphasize you shouldn't drink water when you speak, when you're 92. We need to emphasize the centrality of the patient in all of our deliberations, in all of our actions, in all of our solutions. The critical litmus has been provided by Don Berwick. Quote, how does it help the patient, end quote. Shannon expressed it admirably in her introduction yesterday. May I quote you, Shannon? To get to a better world where healthcare serves communities and not the other way around, where health, not more healthcare, is the goal, we must first imagine that having space for clinicians and patients where medication, deepest power, is capable to ease suffering becomes paramount. Forgive my disrupted sentences. We must first imagine what truly compassionate care of the elderly would be like and how we ourselves want to be cared for, end quote. Providing our people with the medical care they deserve is a moral imperative. It is not enough to expostulate this principle with ecstatic piety. We in the health profession must be agents of deep systematic change, not nibble at the edges of a dysfunctional system. Our objective is to educate a white public, reaching across economic, ethnic, cultural, as well as social divides, aiming not to beseech politicians or sway the various vested interests that control healthcare. We aim to mobilize the white public to compel action. We would profit learning from the past. doctors and other health professionals played a key role in mobilizing the public in the case of PSR, the Physicians for Social Responsibility, which roused Americans to the medical consequences of nuclear war. The International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, the IPPNW, helped end the Cold War. This contribution was recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize. Few of you may know of the ad hoc committee to defend healthcare here in Massachusetts, which organized wide public support for a single-payer healthcare system and inadvertently led to Obamacare as an antidote. It all happened in my living room. You're all invited. Please do not come at once. Ultimately, it is the power of a mobilized, participating, determined, educated, and yes, outraged public that is politically and socially transformative. I share with you a pertinent vignette from a recent book titled Children of the Days, a calendar of human history. It is written by the great Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano. How many of you have read it? Bravo. When India won its independence in 1947, Churchill was determined not to cast away the brightest jewel in the Majesty's crown. Iona, you're free to interrupt me if I'm wrong on my facts. The jewel abandoned the crown. I quote from Children of the Day. The hard road to freedom began in 1930 when Mahatma Gandhi, skinny and half-naked, reached a beach on the Indian Ocean. It was the Salt March. When the march began, there were a handful. By the time they reached the ocean, there were multitudes to darken the sky. Each of them picked a pinch of salt and swallowed it, thereby breaking British law that forbade Indians consuming salt from their own country. The movement thereafter was unstoppable. British exit and Indian independence were assured, end quote. To gain wide public support, it is quintessential that we address the health crisis in its systemic wholeness. As Don Berwick has wisely urged, we need, and I quote him, we need to face up to some of the fundamental issues of, I'm sorry, I'm not quoting him now. We need to face up to some of the fundamental issues of our time, such as inequality, namely wealth inequality, racial inequality, economic inequality, and of course, health inequality. We should not minimize the power of the opposition. The Belgian playwright Maurice Maeterlinck wrote a century ago, and I quote, "At every crossway on the road that leads to the future, each progressive spirit is opposed by 1,000 men appointed to guard the past." When liberals, progressives, or radicals achieve an objective, they rest on the laurels of their accomplishment. This is not the case for those with vested interest, as in the pharmaceuticals, in health insurance, in tech firms, in Wall Street. They may lose repeatedly, but continue unrelentingly, struggling to maintain their advantage. They rarely are smitten with the brilliance of our oratory or the nobility of our purpose. We see this very scenario playing out in the UK. The National Health Service is progressively being disassembled by the guardians of the past. This is ongoing despite the universally acknowledged success of the NHS, of the National Health Service. Once again, we are blessed that the remarkable Iona Heath, formerly president of the Royal College of General Practice, is with us. And I think she already enlightened you last night with what is transpiring in the UK. For progress to take place, the future has to be ready. Are we aiming for the stars? From the long view of history, there would be little progress if people did not demand and struggle for the seemingly unobtainable. Social change becomes inevitable when the public is educated and enters the political arena. The agents of change are many, especially physicians convinced that medicine is a calling, not a business. Rudolf Virchow, among the giants in 19th century healthcare, postulated that medicine is a social science and politics is nothing more than medicine on a grand scale. He believed that physicians were the natural attorneys for the sick as well as the poor and the afflicted. I've depicted the intransigence of established customs among people. I've spoken of the unyielding stance by those in power. I've pointed to the fact that we are just in the process of recruiting a Gideon's army. What then is the source of my optimism? I'm not an adherent of Maya's law, which states if facts do not conform to theory, they are disposed of. I am supporter of the historian Howard Zinn. The peoples are arbiters of history. This is reflected in the long democratic story of our country. It is affirmed the world over. The system of power is corrupt and like a herring rots from the head down. We can become the catalyst of social change. We can be the veritable Gideon's army. Mercifully, we're now approaching the end of my pontification. A lunch you will soon have, so don't get anxious, please. I cannot finish, though, without incorporating some aspect of the title of this address selected by, I believe, by Vikas and Shannon. It involves, as usual, a tale. 3 years ago, the leading Italian cardiovascular journals serialized my book, The Lost Art of Healing. A foundation presented each of the 10,000 Italian cardiologists with a copy. This being Italy, it had an operatic twist with 2 acts. The first involved Pope Benedict XVI at St. Peter's Square sprinkling holy water and blessing the book, as well as Louise and me. The second act was devoted to a debate with leading Italian political, social, and medical thinkers in Florence. The gathering was at the Palazzo Vecchio, held in the majestic Hall of the 500. The meeting was a call for a second renaissance to restore humanism into medicine. The first renaissance, 700 years ago, launched in part by artists, by sculptors, poetry readers, composers, resulting in a revolutionary perception of human beings and the world about them. The man in God was replaced by celebrating the God in man. In the second Renaissance, the mantle shifts to the health profession. Unlike the first, they are indispensable to the public and thereby capable of restoring the godliness of the human community and give full play to the meaning of humanism. The Lown Institute, I believe, seeks to be a catalyst for a renaissance in medicine. By joining forces with patients and communities, we can achieve these ambitious goals. We are not unmindful that human beings are complex amalgams of mind, emotion, spirituality, and yes, a deeply embedded morality. We need to excite the entire neural network. The grand finale of my words has to be with Shakespeare. There is a tide in the affairs of men which, taken at the flood, leads to fortune. And such a full sea are we now afloat. And we must take the current when it serves or lose the venture. Thank you. In the Soviet Union, that I visited Moscow 30 times for the IPPNW, you know what the speaker would do? He would applaud the audience. Bravo.